A coral reef, the ocean's version of a tropical forest. But here, a forest made of animals, preying on microscopic hordes in the water. As on land, tropical life abounds with bizarre beauty. There are countless creatures lurking, ready to feed. And myriads that to the casual or unaided eye remain unseen. This living system began evolving 2 billion years ago. It's a densely populated community that makes maximum use of all its material and energy with minimum waste. Part of the reef's solid structure is formed by the massed calcareous skeletons of algae and colonial animals that grow on the buildup of skeletons of the past. At the same time, there's an even greater buildup of debris, eroded corals, and the broken shells of countless generations of many species, cemented eventually by home-building activities to form 9/10 of the reef. Most food begins with plants, and plants need light, so the water must be clear and relatively shallow. Abundant numbers also need water rich in oxygen. Diversity depends on warmth, near 30 degrees Celsius all year. The fantastic numbers and intense activity are not evident at first, but compared to the watery desert all around, the reef is an oasis, seething with organisms. Recycling resources. As at each level of depth and of size, creatures lie in wait to eat or be eaten. Pipefish prowl the coral forest, a sunlit submarine jungle. Where depth limits are set by dependence on light. About 30 meters down is best for coralline algae, plants with heavy calcareous deposits in their tissues. As in any jungle, growth is dense and rapid. New filaments of algae can grow from asexual spores released into the water, joining microscopic masses of one-celled algae and feeding a host of plant eaters. Plants build food. They originate food chains. At the other end of the chains, minute bacteria break down everything that was once alive, making chemicals available for reuse. They are themselves gobbled up by one-celled predators. A marine amoeba. This one captures its prey by means of sticky threads of its own substance. A living net of protoplasm, fishing hidden waters. Multicelled rotifers strain food from the sea. So do a cluster of one-celled vorticella, Most of the animal colonies are coelenterates, multicellular gelatinous creatures. Each individual in this hydroid colony is called a polyp. Each traps its microscopic prey with batteries of sticky or stinging projectiles mounted on its crown of tentacles. Some generations take the form of miniature mobile umbrellas with a mouth at the end of the handle and around the rim, light-sensitive eye spots. This form is called a medusa. A ring of tentacles hangs down from the rim of its domed, radially organized body. Each will settle down and form a new hydroid colony, budding off polyps that will in turn produce buds. In shape and movement, a medusa resembles a larger relative that no longer has a polyp generation, the jellyfish. This one, green with one-celled algae in its tissues, has an unusual way of feeding. It settles upside down and behaves like another coelenterate, the sea anemone, a sedentary, tentacled trap. Anemones, the predatory flowers of the sea. This is the reef's most abundant coelenterate, coral. A colony of polyps most shaped like tiny sea anemones, feeding on whatever the currents carry to their tentacles. Many have yellow algae in their tissue and trade their own nitrogenous wastes for plant-produced oxygen. In the hard corals, each polyp secretes a protective limestone cup, white with strengthening ridges. Every generation builds up another layer of cups, so that every piece of coral has a dead calcareous core and a living film of polyps that feed mostly at night on the still smaller animals that fill the water. Sea whips, colonies of gorgonians, relatives of coral. Here the skeleton is tough and flexible, but the basic structure is the same. The coral forest provides home sites for other animals that add their limestone secretions to the reef and help cement debris together. Among them, the barnacle, a crustacean that spends its larval days swimming, but ends up, according to the traditional description, standing on its head, kicking food into its mouth. Mollusks also have shells that add substance to the reef. The flame scallop. A shrimp's armor is soft enough to be eaten, but feather duster worms build hard tubular homes that will remain. Underwater erosion produces a steady shower of debris that gets built into the reef. Among the calcareous fallout, the porous shells of one-celled animals called foraminifera, bearers of holes. There are vast populations suspended in the water, many of them larval forms, mollusks, and worms. Many copepods are algae eaters, linking plants to animals in the food chain. Larvae of barnacles and shrimp, adding their numbers to the swarms. The barely visible hordes migrate down by day, up by night, food for the smaller hunters and trappers of the community. Among them, sea squirts, filter feeders that are not quite vertebrates, although their larvae have a stiffening rod along the back. Along with sponges, one of the most primitive multicelled invertebrates, they circulate water through their bodies, straining out food particles. The feather duster. Its segmented body is protected by the hard shell it secretes. Plumed tentacles act as gills and also collect food from the debris that drifts down through the water. A sudden movement or a passing shadow may drive this worm back into its limestone tube. The coral shrimp is a crustacean. So is the stone crab. These are the reef's scavengers. Crabs clean up dead fish and may end up as fish food themselves. A female barber pole shrimp, a spectator, as two males spar over territory. They make a living by cleaning external parasites from the scales and gills of fish that gather near them to be groomed. The shrimps compete for the most advantageous site to set up business. The stinging tentacles of a sea anemone are headquarters for this tiny shrimp. It feeds unharmed on the anemone's leftovers and may act as a decoy to bring other small animals within reach of its host. The soft abdomen of a hermit crab needs protecting. It's been shaped by evolution to fit into an empty mollusk shell, which can easily be exchanged when the crab outgrows it. A jellyfish carries stinging tentacles for protection, but most crabs are fitted with a tough, flexible, plated crust, similar to the outer skeleton of insects. The arrow crab is the daddy longlegs of the reef, a spindly scavenger. The horseshoe crab is not a crab at all, but an ancient marine relative of scorpions and spiders. A living fossil, still feeding on seaweed, dead fish, and marine worms. In order to grow, all these armored creatures must periodically shed their protective coat and expand to their next size while the new one is still soft. A pistol shrimp seeks shelter for molting. It will need this refuge for the few vulnerable hours it will take the new covering to harden. This is the cast-off shell, along with the animal's eggs, released during molting. Prodigal numbers are needed to offset the rate at which a whole host of predators will snatch these fragile creatures from the water. This crab is partly camouflaged by a coating of small sedentary animals, single hydroids and the like. Hitching a free ride may bring them within reach of more food and give them a slight advantage over their stationary colleagues. But the crab must keep its eyes and appendages clean and ready for action. A hermit crab in its second-hand armor prepares for a feeding expedition, constantly testing the water with its sensory appendages. Along the way, it may meet the original owner of the kind of shell it can use, a mollusk, the whelk. With a frontal siphon to suck water over its gills, a strong foot for grasping its prey, other shellfish, and hidden from view, a rasping organ for boring through their shells. Inside whelk eggs, the young will pass through their larval stages and emerge in adult form. This marine snail is the flamingo tongue, with its shell enveloped by a soft fold of its own body. It's part predator, part parasite, preying on the polyps of gorgonians, but leaving enough to keep the colony alive. Nudibranchs have no shell at all. They're the slugs of the sea. With their fantastic shapes, colors, and patterns, they are one of the most striking of all invertebrates. They breathe through tufted gills exposed on their backs. Nudibranchs browse on seaweed. They lay eggs by the thousands. This intricate network of white strands will be left strung along the reef's underbrush. The young will have the coiled bodies and matching coiled shells of typical snails. But by the time they mature, their bodies will have straightened out and their shells will have disappeared to fit them for the mobile existence of adulthood. Nudibranch colors can act as camouflage. A predator might take this one for a piece of the seaweed it feeds on, or this as more of the pale rubbish all around. A limpet is almost invisible against a background of bits of sun-bleached coral. But one of the mollusks can even change color. The octopus, a cephalopod, a creature with its foot wrapped around its head. This female has been guarding her eggs, keeping them free of the coral dust that might otherwise smother them. Even at this stage of development, the young can change their appearance. Pigment sacs beneath the skin have muscles to squeeze them into more or less prominence, to give protection by pallor or by blush. The octopus has also given up its shell and gained a hunter's mobility. Another set of mobile predators, the starfish. This serpent star's missing arm can be regenerated. But this is the one that's most likely to escape a predator by leaving behind a replaceable appendage. The brittle star. The starfish moves by means of a cushion of tube feet along its arms. Each foot is tipped with a suction pad and made mobile by a combination of muscles and water pressure from a built-in hydraulic system. The same organs help grasp and pry open the shells of clams and oysters. Sea urchins belong to the same group, echinoderms, spiny-skinned. They're the porcupines of the reef. The mouth is a highly complicated structure used to grind up seaweed and occasionally sea anemones. All the echinoderms have larvae with bilateral symmetry. They may be close relatives of vertebrates. This is the lead pencil urchin. The sea cucumber is an echinoderm that lies on its side. Lines along its body and a set of retractable tentacles are the only external evidence of its adult radial symmetry. A sea cucumber's immobility may help it escape notice by enemies. But for fish, the birds of this jungle, survival may depend on agility. The angelfish is equipped with teeth that brush soft, edible coral polyps from their limestone cups. This little goby is feeding near someone else's burrow, the jawfish, a species with a highly developed sense of territory. It excavates a protective home out of the loose rubble on the reef. The jawfish will tolerate the approach of another species like the goby, but not the presence of one of its own kind. This large snake-like hunter threads through cracks and crevices. The moray eel. The clownfish is another animal that sets up a partnership with a sea anemone. It's protected by a thick mucus coating and by its built-in ability to teach the anemone not to sting. Its host accepts certain species as colleagues. But all sea anemones take most small fish as nothing but food. Eat and be eaten. Every scrap of edible material is used. With a cleanup squad of microscopic hunters, busily feeding on each other and on the bacteria that break down organic matter. Converters of energy and of material. Nothing is wasted as the whole reef community recycles the chemicals that life builds into a vast array of forms, breaks down, and then builds up again. Innumerable unseen lives perpetuate this whole ancient oceanic oasis.